You're listening to Development Works, produced by Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses. Hello friends, I'm Andrew Wilson.
And I'm Michael Carlson. This is Development Works, supported by Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses.
And on today's upcast, before doing international development, you should learn that teamwork makes development work.
We hear from Alanna and Aaron about their work together in Namibia and their individual experiences, from Dr. Alanna running programs in Namibia to Aaron's PhD research on what works in international partnerships. They come together to work on some pretty incredible stuff from very different backgrounds.
Dr. Alanna Fitzgerald-Husek is a public health physician who has been actively involved in global health initiatives for over a decade, primarily in Namibia, but also in India, Uganda, and the Solomon Islands. In Namibia, she collaborated with a local organization on HIV risk reduction initiatives and research examining factors influencing female sex workers' ability to negotiate condom use. Her continued work in Namibia also includes establishing Northern Namibia's first swimming and life-saving program, as well as teaching a curriculum development in Namibia's medical school. Our other speaker today is Aaron Yarmoshuk, is a researcher and has worked across Africa for 20 years on a range of projects and programs with rural communities, universities, and private companies. He's worked in Kenya, Nigeria, Sub-Saharan Africa, Namibia, and Malawi, just to name a few. For 10 years, he managed a portfolio of partnerships with Sub-Saharan Africa universities, including Moi University in Kenya, University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and the University of Namibia. And his PhD examines international partnerships and capacity building in Kenyan and Tanzanian university health programs. Mike, I am so excited about today's episode. This is the first time we've had two speakers, two teammates on an event. Alanna and Aaron have worked together and known each other since both working in the same project team in Namibia in 2006. They continued to work together for years afterwards while Alanna was implementing a program in Namibia as well. So today on the Upcast, Alanna and Aaron lets us know what works in international development.
But first, this Upcast is powered by Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses. We're a Canadian charity that sponsors the medical education of high-potential youth in rural Nicaragua. If you want to ensure everyone has access to quality health care, first visit doctorsfordoctors.ca.
But what I wanted to talk about is when I went rogue in Namibia and did not do what Aaron told me to do. So the third time I think I was going back, I was an HIV Knowledge Network officer through the Center for International Health, CETA funded, like feeling pretty good about this, you know. I'd gone there a number of times. It was a great opportunity. And when I got there, so, you know, it's working with the same organizations and the same community-based partnership that I worked with out of the University of Namibia, community outreach arm called the Small Business Development Center. And everything was well set. We knew these people. I'd been working with them for the last couple of years. Aaron knew them well. And this is not meant as a reflection on him or the programs here. Everything was well set up. But when I got to Namibia, this time, you know, now we're back in the rainy season. And basically, the priorities were different. So that's another thing we wanted to talk about, priorities being really important. So the priorities that were set at the beginning of this program and that my position and the funding was built upon, on the ground, things changed. So in the rainy season where we were in Namibia, the dry season, it's flat as a pancake. In the rainy season, there's flash flooding. And people go fishing, and then people start drowning, and then they call in the police to rescue them, and then the police also can't swim, and sometimes they might drown too. And nobody knows how to swim there because there's usually not a body of water. And someone had built a pool, and I somehow said, well, I know how to swim, and I teach swimming back home, and I'm a lifeguard, and blah, blah, blah. So the next thing I know, we're setting up the first ever swimming program and teaching life-saving and rescue skills to the police force and out-of-school youth. So this is something where, and initially, you know, my Canadian boss, Aaron, and some others may not have been too thrilled with me. Maybe I should have communicated a little bit better about what I thought the worth of this was and about it being locally identified priorities. And what was really interesting to me was it sort of just was a perfect storm of all these things going on and saying maybe I'm the right person at the right time and I'm interested and I've done a bunch of teaching and swimming and other things in other ways. And then, okay, well, what else do we need to figure out? We need to get funders. We need to get the right people on board. We need to make sure that this is not hinging on me and my ability to stay here and keep contributing to this. I'm not going to be here for forever. Realistically, I'm going to go home and go back to my life in Canada. Although even I think I might stay longer here was, one thing I was considering at a point. But how do we make sure, or try to make sure, that this is meeting community needs, that this project will hopefully live a little bit beyond, and that it will make a difference. So some of the lessons or takeaways I heard or took from it, one of the things, and I think if anybody's sort of engaging in any sort of experiences, is, don't bite off more than you can chew, and sort of start small, because, you get excited, you get involved, and things have a way of snowballing. And the next thing I knew, there was a very well-off man who became a good friend of mine and basically the benefactor and funder of this program, whose name was Ben. And he's a wonderful man. And he flew his private plane down one day from Angola in a rush because the phone lines were down with all the flooding and stuff, to show up and be like, well, the Army's found out you're teaching the police. This isn't in the right pecking order. The Army needs to be taught too. They're showing up in 2 days. You need to be teaching them as well. So that was not going to happen, but it was an instance to me of saying, okay, have we gone through this all the right way? Have we consulted the right people? Things operate differently there. We can't expand, even though this might be nice, but what's the mandate of what we're trying to do with the program? Who's involved? What's feasible? And then sort of build from there. And then importantly as well, it was trying to figure out, how do I phase myself out? So if I'm teaching the youth to become, say, swimming instructors, and the thought is down the line that maybe this program would teach some of the school-age children who are sometimes some of the ones who are drowning, how could they keep going? How do we teach some of the police and give them the right equipment they need, that they can go out into the community to hopefully rescue some people, but also that they could maybe teach some of their other colleagues in the 3 towns where the police forces were that we were teaching. So it was sort of in trying to set up these principles and realizing that sometimes the best of intentions can go awry, or you constantly have to keep coming back and looking at what are you doing am I using proper processes, and the right decision made, or the right decisions being made, the right decision making processes to get the right outcomes. And sometimes those don't all align. So then, where's your deal breaker? Where's the most important one by how you kind of choose to act?
I love that Alanna took the time to understand a local problem and addressed it. She's talking about how to run the programs of international development. When she says going rogue, what she really means is seeing a problem, staying agile enough to shift her focus and her work, and then teaming up with the full support of the Namibian supervisor and colleagues to make sure the program was well executed. She had to divert from the original Canadian plan to help more people when the context changed. This is a theme we've seen a few times now, Mike, but this really hits it home for me.
Yeah, but she's also not shy about making clear how difficult it is to adapt on the fly to changing priorities. So this clearly wasn't easy from what she's talking about. And then, this rich guy who involves the military in her story. And that's the definition of your political environment undercutting any development you're trying to do. The damn bureaucracy getting in the way. So that's why it might even be harder or smarter to fly beneath the radar of the government and stay small and maybe do covert work so you don't have to deal with that bureaucracy.
That's a good point, Mike, but I think you'll see later on in this episode that involving the local government in some way early on can actually come in really handy if you want to expand in the future, even though it can kind of create some problems for you in the short term. In this next clip, Aaron talks about the partnerships of international development, the work he's done in his PhD in East Africa. Now, for some context here, Aaron did his thesis in evaluating partnerships, specifically evaluating 4 universities in Kenya and Tanzania, and their partnerships with hundreds of other universities overseas. From this work, he found what I like to think of as kind of like a recipe for creating success in international development partnerships.
Based on their responses, I determined the value of those partnerships based on their responses, the value of those partnerships for strengthening their health professional programs. 25% of them were considered higher value partnerships. 33% were considered median value partnerships. And 42% were considered lower value partnerships for them. And the point is that partnerships is used, the term is used a lot, but there are a lot of different types of partnerships out there. I don't think there is a perfect model. It's dependent on time and place. But there are 3 things that I found that all higher value partnerships had. And one, they prioritize the needs of the focus university, therefore one of the 4 universities in East Africa. The support of the focus university helped to increase the focus university's long-term capacity. So it was, in fact, institution building. It wasn't just helping an individual, it was actually helping an individual within the institution so that the institution, i.e. the university, was strengthened. And finally, the capacity benefits realized favored the focus university more so than the international partner. In a partnership, both sides need to benefit. It needs to be mutually beneficial. But if the lower, in this case, the lower middle income university is benefiting less than the higher income university, you have a problem if it's going to be a global health partnership. And that comes to the issue of reciprocity. Is there real reciprocity? So if you're interested in my work on partnerships, you can go to hppafrica.org and you can see some of the research.
Man, this is the lovely thing about PhDs. Somebody is always asking really cool questions and finding amazing answers. But the sad part broadly is accessing this info can be tricky because there's so much of it out there to sift through. But lucky for us, in Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses in this podcast, Aaron came in to talk to us directly so we could benefit from his work.
Yeah, he's breaking down hundreds of relationships and telling us about the ones that had the most impact.
It's fascinating to think about what the implications of Aaron's research are in other contexts, like even our partners in Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses. I would guess this means that we really need to revisit how we support them and interact with them.
Yeah, for me, it means that we should be focusing on propping up our local partners wherever possible as an organization. So we need to listen to the individuals that we work with and that work there, but also do whatever we can to grow their organization as a whole, thinking sustainably more long-term, even if they leave or after they leave. I really like that Aaron's recipe for success here.
In this next clip, Alanna tells us about the people that you work with while doing international development. So for context, this is from Alanna's work back in Namibia in 2006. She was working with sex workers at the time and brings the discussion back to the most important factor, the people.
So then the next thing we sort of wanted to chat about, which we sort of started talking about, is the people that we worked with and the relationships that we've sort of formed. I'm sure in this speaker series, for those of you who've been up before, everybody's talked about the importance of really listening, coming in, like having a certain amount of humility and humbleness, listening to the community, like going in understanding and acknowledging, that we don't know everything. We don't know what's best. And also we come with our own biases as well. But, we can contribute, and it's in working with the communities there. And the one I really wanted to focus and talk a little bit about is the women I worked with, and also the role sometimes of what this looks like in terms of engaging. So I've worked a lot, maybe not a lot compared to others, but I think a fair amount where the work that I've done has been around young women, marginalized women, and those vulnerable. So whether I'm on the Adolescent Girls Health and Wellness Project in rural India when I was there, or in Namibia with these women who are engaging in transactional sex. And this was at a time when the country's HIV/AIDS rate was about 19 or so %, which is pretty high when you think that's almost 1 in 5. So this was the context in which I was, and also sex work and transactional sex was going on, and this is not necessarily a formalized in a brothel type thing. But this is literally like, I'll give you a phone card and I'll buy your meal and bring your kid to hospital if you have sex with me. And like in the bushes in the back or something. We're talking like semi-rural, urban, or rural sort of settings, and very, very vulnerable women who, a number of them have sort of said over time, I do what I have to do to survive. I'm doing this, I might want a way out, but I don't know how. And I'm not thinking 3 months, 3 years down the line, even 3 weeks sometimes. Like, what's my daily reality and my needs, and how can I meet that? So when I was there, I think really what stood out to me is getting trust and building those relationships. Interestingly enough, being female helped in terms of gaining trust from women who are at this point really economically dependent on men, may not have great exchanges with them sometimes, have been, beaten or abused, or fearful of them sometimes before. But also being a foreigner, being an outsider. Namibia is also, as Erin said, 70% of the population lives in the north. There's also only 2 million people in the country, and literally everybody seems to know everybody. So sometimes, as much as they trusted and confided in the ones that worked with them, they sometimes felt more okay, whether that's a good thing or not, to disclose certain things to me as an outsider. Knowing that I don't know their cousin or their other friend or the circumstances, or I can't tell somebody within their community. Also sometimes thinking, because I'm coming from Canada, an affluent country, then I can then fix things, or I can give them money or fix the situation better than them themselves or the people supporting them on the ground. So this project, as I mentioned earlier, like I'd started off doing supposed to be doing a research related thing. And, the work came out, and what I sort of at the end of the day, we were looking at is saying the funding comes in, the NGO is funding them to, teach people to use condoms. The ABC approach of abstinence, be faithful, condomize doesn't work. Then they're saying, well, we just need to educate them and tell them how to use condoms, and that's going to fix it. But if you're a disempowered, disenfranchised female who's economically dependent on a male, that probably won't work so well either. And the issue was a lot of the men viewed it as empowering women as a threat to males' power and position too. So anyway, how do you then rearrange and teach so that maybe empowering one can help empower others, and if we're all in this together, maybe it's not sort of a gender divide thing there. So how do you straddle that to make sure you're not supporting the most vulnerable? And then I went back a couple times, and we ended up starting a vocational training project, but basically looked at saying, this one exchange, this woman may not be able to, it looks too risky, but if she had another alternative, like if another way of earning money, so say she knew how to sew or do something else that she could earn a livelihood, that this one time, this one exchange, she could say, this is just too risky, I'm not going to do it. And like, what if we just started there? We can't say we're going to fix it all, but what if that one time was that one instance that was just too risky, and she felt empowered enough and had some skills to draw on and win another way of earning money? And that was successful, and that, was something for us that we could sort of build on, and seemed to make a difference there for the women themselves. And then they ended up teaching others as well, and trying to find ways or people that they could work with to sew and earn money, whether in the informal economy or also try and approach an organization, say for a conference that needed conference bags being sewn. So this was an example of where we think having those connections with the community and sort of listening to what they needed, and struggling sometimes trying to navigate a difficult divide of, I'm going to donors, the American funders or whoever, not because I should be speaking for these women, but because they may not know of or decide they want to speak to these vulnerable women. So how do I just say, hey, you need to come here and sit at the table with these people, so I can speak their language of writing grants or getting the money, but at the end my role was sort of to try to connect with these women, with the people that can help support them and fund what they need, to try to get a way out or to get another opportunity.
It's amazing what can happen by just standing behind one person, especially in their most vulnerable times.
There's that catchphrase, like, one person can change the world. Well, maybe we need an addendum to that. Maybe one person can change the world and standing behind another person can also change the world too.
I like that Alanna really highlights the context around this kind of condom education program. Like, you cannot separate condom use from sex workers from elements of cultural power for males. They're just too tightly intertwined.
There's so many pieces there. But another piece that I really appreciated was Alanna highlighting that she can be the most effective with funders if she simply amplifies the voice of those she's trying to work with. It's a brilliant, simple idea. So acting as the translator of vulnerable persons specifically to funders. It's a solid advice.
Erin is now going to walk us through an essential lesson on international development. And we've never included a fourth clip here from a speaker before, right, Mike?
Yeah.
But the idea of defining what a relationship is in international development was so important that I thought we just had to include it.
Alanna touched on the importance of relationships and trust. And reality is that you don't automatically trust someone. Well, sometimes you do. Sometimes you really get burnt doing it too. Trust usually builds up over time. And one of the things about what I've always found in development is, yeah, you can have some great one-off relationships. Interactions, I would call them. I wouldn't call them relationships because they're interactions. You meet someone, you have a discussion, maybe you do a short-term project. But it's not a relationship. Relationships take time. And so my recommendation to you is, if you are interested in this type of work, is to explore options, to get involved, to do some placements, implement some projects. Maybe do it one in one location, one in another, and then try to go back to one of them to build on your previous experience. The second time around, and then to continue with the same individuals, is what is needed to have to build a lasting relationship and therefore a partnership. And I keep noticing that in my work. And the second time I went back to Malawi for a second 2-year stint, I interacted very well with people in the first stint, but it was so much easier the second time, and was able to get a lot of more things done.
Whew. I think Aaron really hits the nail on the head when he says that relationships are not just one-off things that happen. They build over periods of time and require an effort longer lasting than a trip overseas.
I really agree with Aaron here too, Mike. The value of building long-lasting relationships is crucial to working with people. I've never heard this kind of teasing apart of interactions from relationships, though. I think keeping that work close to my head in the work that I do in Nicaragua is really going to help. From what I see overseas, people want to help a lot and make a lot of commitments based on interactions because they're so excited. I've seen how communities locally can become almost bitter about this, and how the most successful programs and projects have these key relationships in play that take years to build.
What's also difficult about this is that relationships aren't impressive from the outside. Like, Andrew, think about it. Even when we introduce the speakers, we give them credit for how many countries they've worked in, how much they've seen, like this resume of these important different things. We never mention who they know or how much those people trust them.
Yeah, like, Mike, could you imagine introductions like, and here's Alanna that has only ever worked in Namibia. She returns there 2 times a year. She knows Dr. Jim, she knows Jill, and Stanley, and they all think she's just awesome.
And everybody knows Dr. Stanley, that he's the standard for people there. These are soft skills in international development, and they're hard to talk about and even harder to quantify. But I think we're starting to learn that this is the stuff that really matters for making a difference. So, Andrew, do you think having 2 speakers on this podcast really paid off?
Honestly, I thought it was great. I wasn't sure exactly what it would look like, but the wisdom that was demonstrated from this dialogue was really unique. Alanna and Aaron, it was absolutely wonderful to have you both come down and speak with us about international development. But don't take my word for it. Here's Gabby, the president of our University of Toronto Student Club, in a segment we call
Gabby's 2 cents.
On behalf of the Student Club, thank you, Alanna and Aaron, for the awesome talk on projects, people, and partnerships. This was definitely quite a unique episode of Development Works, as it was the first time we have ever had 2 speakers in one event. Their entire talk was very insightful, but I was personally very interested in the amazing work that Aaron and Alanna have done in Namibia. It truly shed light on a side of international development that I had not learned about before. Once again, thank you, Alanna and Aaron, for sharing so much wisdom with us.
For all our listeners, if you want to hear everything that Alanna and Aaron or any of our other speakers for Development Works say unedited, you can always come to our live recordings at the University of Toronto downtown campus. Check out our website, doctorsfordoctors.ca, to find all the event details. Our Canadian charity strives to do the best international development work possible, and as we continue to learn, we are sharing all our learnings with you.
And we would love to hear from you, so drop us a line on our website if you want to volunteer or get involved.
And now, updates for the month.
In Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses this month, we are slowly shifting into a reflection mode. Summertime for us is a time for reflecting on the work we have done up until now and continuing to brainstorm and lay out new tracks for where we want to go in our future. In Nicaragua, our 4 medical students are working hard. It is midterm season for them. And our team is going down to Nicaragua in July to meet with our students and see how we can better support them.
On our Canadian side, we're investing huge amounts of time to recruit a human resources volunteer. This person will help create, find, and bring on all of the other volunteer positions. Also, an important event that DFD-NFN has created is called the TAO, and that's coming up soon. It's Tear Apart the Organization. Now, it's been essential to helping us continually innovate and improve our methods, and it might sound a little bit violent, but every year we hold one meeting where we invite all our volunteers to sit and complain about everything in the organization that we possibly can. And then we put the organization back together. So we tear it apart and then we sit and categorize all those complaints, draft solutions to the problems. And by the end of the summer, we're ready to roll out a lot of new ideas and policies and procedures. So I think we're both looking forward to that.
Yeah. And that does it for this month's episode of Development Works on Doctors for Doctors and Nurses for Nurses. So let's hand it back to Aaron for the last word.
Interacting with government's important, even if it's difficult. I think it's really important to respect local authority, even if you don't necessarily always agree with them. I've always felt, and I've always think I have been, a visitor when I've gone to another country. Your local partners at a university, at NGO, can liaise with the government. You don't necessarily need to be the one doing it. Maybe it's not even appropriate for you to be the one doing it. But I think it is important. A lot of times, if you want results long term, that governments know what you're doing.
And that's everything for this month's episode of Development Works. Remember to subscribe to the podcast to stay current with international development. Thanks for listening.
This is Andrew and Mike signing off, and remember, if you don't make mistakes, you're not working on hard enough problems.